Good morning and welcome back to our course on the C programming. In today's session, we are going to discuss about a concept called arguments in C. In the previous session, we have seen something related to functions. We have started our discussion with what a function is and what is the syntax of the function and all those things we have discussed. And two important points regarding this function is, in C programming language, anything you want to give a solution for a problem, you will be giving in terms of functions only. And there exists at least one function, and the name of that function is the main function. And as I told that, if there is a problem, let us take an example. If there is a problem and if the problem is given to three programmers P1, P2 and P3, the solution to this particular problem is given by the programmer P1 in two different functions. This is just an example I am giving, right? Similarly, the same problem solution will be given by the programmer P2 in three different functions. And similarly, P3, the programmer P3 may give the solution to the problem in single function. The reason why I am giving this example is, you should know that whenever a problem is there and whenever you are asked to give the solution to the problem using C programming language, then the programmer can give the solution with any number of functions. So there is no limitation on how many parts you are going to divide the program or how many functions you are making use to give the solution to the problem. As you can see here, P1 has given the solution in two functions, P2 in three functions and P3 in single function. It is all clear, right? So if somebody asks you how many functions you can divide, means there is no limitation and it entirely depends on the logic of the programmer. This is one point that I would like to clear with you, right? And this is very important. You can give a solution to a problem with at least one function, that is called the main function. So out of these two functions what the programmer P1 has given, one function should be the main function. The second function can be anything. And the second programmer, he has given the solution with three functions, but out of these three functions, one function should be main. And the programmer P3 has given the solution with only one function, and mandatorily the name of the function should be main. So the main function plays very important role in the C programming language. As I told that you cannot write a single program without the main function in C. That is the importance of the main function. Why it is so important means, as we know that the program execution always starts with the main function. Whenever you press the Ctrl F9 for running the program, the compiler will go and execute the program, it will go and search the main function, and then it will start its execution from that particular point. Very important point. So this is all about the introductory part related to functions. These are all related to arguments in C. That is the reason why I am just giving you the brief introduction to these functions. And in the previous session, we have seen the syntax of the function also. The function syntax has two important parts. One is the header and the second one is the body of the function. And header will have three parts. We know it, right? The first one is the return type, the second one is the function name, and the third one is the argument list. I'm just giving an example. Return type space function name After that, we have to give the argument list within the parenthesis, and then we have the body of the function. Now the present point of interest for our discussion is this part, the third part of the header, which is nothing but the argument list. Let us start our discussion with what this argument list is. So an argument is nothing but a variable that is capable of, that can receive the values, from the calling function. I will give it with an example also, don't worry, but at present point of time you just remember what these arguments are. Arguments are nothing but the variables that can receive the values from the calling function. In the previous session we have seen what this calling function is and what is this called function is. So the function which calls another function is called as this calling function, and the function which is called by another function is called as the called function. We'll see it with an example, right? So these two functions, that means the calling function and the called function, they are going to communicate with each other. How it is possible? How these two functions are going to communicate with each other? That communication is always possible with the concept of arguments. So this argument list can be taken as the input to the function. So how you are going to give some inputs to the function? If somebody asks you, undoubtedly you can say that the functions receive the data in the functions receive the data in the form of arguments. So the inputs to the function are nothing but the arguments. The communication is invoked between the calling and the called function with the help of arguments. So this is all about the arguments. An argument is nothing but a variable that can receive some data from the calling function or the calling program. And these arguments, they serve as the input data to the function to carry out the specific task. We know what a function is. A function is nothing but a set of instructions or a group of statements that can perform a particular task. In order to perform that particular task, the functions may require some input data. That input data to the functions to perform that task is given by the argument list. So this is all about the introduction to the arguments. Till now we have seen what this argument is. Now we will see what are the types of arguments we have. Very important concept. Basically the C programming language supports two types of arguments, that is the actual arguments and the second one is the formal arguments. These are the two types of arguments that are supported by the C programming language. What are those? There is nothing but actual arguments and the second one is the formal arguments. Let us discuss this concept of actual and formal arguments with the help of a programming example. So let us start our program. The same C program that can read two values, two integer values, and output the sum of those two integers, right? So I start my program with the preprocessor directive #include stdio.h, and then I have the main function, right? I take two variables, int a, let me initialize it with 10, int b, let me initialize it with 20. Now I am calling my function sum with two values, that is a comma b. And now I close it. Now I am writing the definition of the function. The definition of the function means it should include the header as well as the body. The header includes the return type. Here I am not specifying any return type. So the second part is the name of the function, which is sum, and the third part is nothing but the argument list, right? So since at this function call I have two variables a and b, since I am passing two variables a and b, there should be two variables to cast those values. Let me take those two values as int a and int b itself, right? And then I am taking another variable int result. Now I am adding the result a plus b and putting it into the result. Now I am just printing it onto the screen. Printf result is equal to percentile d and the placeholder is variable result. So this is my small program which takes two values a and b and gives the sum of those two integer values. Very simple thing, right? Now we are not going to we will discuss about the function, how it is going to work, and at the same time we are going to distinguish between the actual arguments and formal arguments. This is our topic of interest. As we know that the execution of the C program is always sequential in fashion. Whenever you press Ctrl plus F9, it will start its execution from this point, and from the main it starts its execution. Here listen carefully, this is one important point you should understand. This is the declaration statement. So the memory allocation happens here for A, that means 4 bytes of memory will be allocated and it is named as A, and since it is initialized to 10, value 10 will be stored here. Similarly, this is also another declaration statement. Therefore memory will be allocated at this point, 4 bytes will be allocated and the name is given as B for the entire 4 bytes, and the value that is initialized is 20. Up to here we are clear, right? Now the third statement is the function call statement. This is function call statement. Whenever the compiler comes across the function call statement, the control will jump from the calling function to the called function. So you can observe here that there are two functions here. One is the main function and the second one is the sum function. Here in the main function you call the function sum. Therefore the main function is called as the calling function and the sum function is called as the called function. You should observe the difference between the terminology, very important, right? So the main function is called as the calling function and the sum function is called as the called function. And at this function call statement, the control will jump from the function call statement to the definition of the function, called function. So from here the control will jump and it will start its execution from this point. Here what happened, you should observe very carefully. Here the control is jumped along with the two values A and B, along with two values A and B, that is 10 and 20 respectively. So 10 is passed and 20 is also passed. This concept is very important. This we are going to discuss again in the concept of parameter passing mechanisms. Very important. This is called as call by value. We will discuss the concept when we go through that particular concept, right? So right now the control along with the two values, that is 10 and 20, is passed to the function. Since you are passing two integer values 10 and 20, there should be two integer variables to catch hold of these values. So I'm just throwing the integer, there should be some variable over there. I'm just throwing a float, there should be a float variable. If I throw the character value, there should be a character variable. Like that, the data type of the values that a function is throwing should match with the variable data type of the variables that is declared in the function definition. So this 10 is it is stored in this variable a, and this is stored in this 20 is stored in this variable. Very important point, super important point that I would like to tell here is, you might have a doubt that whether this a is equal to this a and b or not. So this a and b, which is in the function call statement, have their own memory locations. Let me take the base addresses as 100 and 200. And when you pass these values to the called function, here I am declaring new variables a and b. Of course, the name of the variables is same, but the declarations are different. This is one declaration and this is another declaration. So what happens here is, another memory will be allocated, another 4 bytes of memory will be allocated. Let me take the base address as 300 and name it as a, and whatever value that is thrown first will be stored inside this a. 10 will be stored. Similarly, int b is also another declaration statement. Therefore, memory, 4 bytes of memory will be allocated and it is named as b. Let me take the base address as 400. And the second value that is thrown will be caught inside this b variable. Therefore, it stores 20. Now you can see here, the a and b in the main function have the base addresses of 100 and 200 respectively. But the a and b, the same variable names are same, but they occupy different locations. They are different. This a is different from this a. This b is different from this b. Right. So the a and b in the function definition of the sum have the base addresses as 300 and 400. They are different. Very important point. Please keep it in mind that this a and b are different from this a and b. So in general, what people will do is, in order to avoid the confusion, what people will do is, instead of the same variable names, they try to give different variable names like this. You can give x and y, then there will not be any confusion, right? So whatever value that is thrown from a, that is 10, is stored inside this x. Similarly, whatever value that is thrown from b, that is 20, is stored inside the second variable y. Now local variables, this is x and y, like this. Simple. So don't get confused. You can use your own variable names in the function definition. They may not be equal to that, same as that of the variable names of the calling function. They can be different. But the point here you have to remember is, even though the names of the variables are same, they are different variables. They are treated differently. That is the important point. You should keep it in mind. Right. So what happened here? X is storing this 10 and y is storing this 20. So here there is another variable result. So memory will be allocated 4 bytes and assume that the base address is 500. Initially it consists of some garbage value, and result is equal to x plus y. At this point, result is equal to x plus y. Therefore 10 plus 20, 30 will be stored inside this result, and I am just displaying the value of the result. And this is how the function is going to be executed. What happens during the function call, whether the control is going to jump or what, right? Once the last statement is executed, once this last opening brace is executed, the control will jump from the called function to the calling function again. So control is jumped from this place to this place, right? And it starts its execution from this point, from the next point. Since there are no statements, it will execute the closing curly brace of the main function and it will terminate the program, right? So this is how the function call is going to take place. Very important concept. And now coming to our point of interest, actual arguments and formal arguments. Here at this point we have seen that during the function call of the sum by the main function, we have two variables a and b. So these variables are called as the actual arguments. These are called as the actual arguments. That means at this particular point, a and b, in this particular example, a and b are called as actual arguments. Once you call the function, the control along with the values of the actual arguments are passed to the function definition, and they are stored in their local variables, that is x and y. These variables, the arguments which are present in the function definition of the sum function, these are called as the formal arguments. Here in this example we have x and y. So remember that I told you the definition of the argument, that an argument is nothing but a variable that is capable of transferring the information or receiving the information, right? Here the a and b variables are declared inside which function? It is nothing but the calling function. So we can define the actual arguments as the arguments which are declared, or the variables which are declared inside the calling function are called as the actual arguments. And how do we define the formal arguments? These are the variables that are declared in the actual function definition of the called function. The sum is called as called function and the main is called as calling function. So variables in the calling function are called as actual arguments. Variables in the call function are called as formal arguments. Simple definitions, right? So once again I am just repeating the meaning of the actual arguments and the formal arguments. The actual arguments are the variables that are declared inside the calling function, and the formal arguments are the variables that are declared inside the function definition of the called function. This is the important thing you have to observe. So I think you are clear about the formal arguments and the actual arguments, right? As I told that, let us have a recap of these things. Basically the function arguments are classified into two categories, that is the actual arguments and the formal arguments. The variables that are declared in the function definition are known as the formal arguments, and the variables that are passed to the called function from the calling function are called as the actual arguments, right? And one important point, very important point, the actual arguments, what is the relationship between these actual arguments and formal arguments? Means the number, I told you 3 points in the previous class, right, regarding parameters. What are these parameters? Parameters are something which are similar to that of arguments. We can say that arguments are also called as parameters. So we can call these actual arguments as actual parameters. We can call these formal arguments as formal parameters. So the other name for the arguments is nothing but the parameters. So the relationship between the actual argument and the formal argument is they should match in the number of parameters. If you see at this particular point, the actual argument, the number of actual arguments are a and b, that is 2. they should match with the number of formal arguments. Therefore, two formal arguments you should define, x and y. And similarly, the actual arguments should match with the data types of the formal parameters. The data type should match. Here you can see that the actual arguments, in this example, the actual arguments a and b are of type integer. Therefore, the formal arguments x and y are also integer. They cannot be other data type. If they are other data type, there is nothing to execute. So the data types of the actual arguments and the data types of the formal arguments should match with each other. And the third important point, the order of parameters should also match. What do you mean by order? Means this a and b, this is int comma int, this is the order. The actual argument order is int comma int. The formal argument also should match. Therefore, whenever you declare the formal arguments or parameters, they should have the order of int comma int only. Int comma int only. This is all about the actual arguments and the formal arguments. We'll again recap these concepts, the function calling and the actual and formal parameters, in the concept of passing arguments to functions. There is another important concept, very super important concept, that is passing arguments to functions. At that particular point, we will come back again to the discussion on this function call, what is this actual argument, what is this formal arguments, everything we will discuss, right? So this is all about the arguments concept in the functions of C. But before ending the topic, let me have a small recap of function declaration. Right here, I have given the definition of the function sum after the function call. Therefore, it will give some warnings or it will give some problems. In order to avoid those problems, the first thing is either you can define this entire function before the function call, that means before the main, or the second solution is you can specify the function prototype in the global declaration section. Global declaration section is nothing but the section that lies between the preprocessor directives and the functions. This is the global declaration section, global part. At this point, you can give the function declaration. Function declaration is nothing but the header followed by the semicolon. So the header is nothing but sum, and what are the arguments we have? Int x comma int y, and end it with semicolon. This is nothing but is function declaration. When you declare the function, no warnings will be given to you. You can simply run the program, right? And one important point you should observe here is when you are giving the function declaration, important point, please concentrate, right? When you are giving the function declaration, I told that you can give the function header as it is, which is ended with the semicolon. But there is another thing you can skip also, right? There is no need to give these variable names. You just specify the data types, that's it. So the correct function prototype or function declaration for this sum is sum int comma int and end it with a semicolon. This is the original function declaration. And another important point, last important point that I would like to give you is the function declaration is otherwise called as function prototype. Very important. You may be asked in the question examination point of view, it is very important. Somebody will ask you a question like this, explain something related to function prototypes. So don't get confused. Function prototype is otherwise called as function declaration. You should explain everything related to the function declaration. That itself is the topic related to function prototype. So the other name for function declaration is function prototype. So in this session we have seen what actually is an argument is. We have started with a recap of some of the important concepts that are related to functions, and then we have defined what an argument is, and then we have seen the different types of arguments that are supported in the C programming language, like the actual argument and the formal argument. We have explained it with a clear example of addition of two integer values and giving the result. We have seen how the function flow is going to happen, how the values are going to be copied from the actual arguments to the formal arguments. Finally, I just want to give the definition of this actual argument. Actual arguments are those arguments that are passed to the call function or that are declared inside the calling function. And the formal arguments are those variables which are defined or declared inside the function definition of the called function. Right. That's all for today's session. Thank you one and all for joining the session.